Ladies and gentlemen, the Brit Pack is back. Well, to be more accurate, half of the Brit Pack is back because my buddy Sandhu is away this week. But fear not, you might not get him on this week's podcast, but you will be able to see his happy smiley face this week as part of MMA Junkie's video coverage of Bellator 179 in London. So do be sure to look out for that. Now, as far as this show goes, well, it's going to be a bit different because you've just got me. I'm Simon Head, an MMA journalist from right here in the UK. It is a beautiful day here just outside Rochester in the southeast of England. I've got the window open, so if you hear the birds singing, that's why. And yeah, we're just chilling out here and looking back on what was a pretty crazy weekend of mixed martial arts. I'm not going to lie, the late night absolutely killed me. I was up in Birmingham on the Friday night for BAMMA 29, which was a great night of fights, really good fun, and they looked after us royally on press row. It's the only time I've ever been on press row, and one of the BAMMA staff turned up mid-show handing out Subway sandwiches, packets of crisps and bottles of water, so we were all very grateful for that. It was a great night up there in Birmingham, but it was a late night. I came back home on the train on Saturday morning and got home absolutely knackered. I'm going to be completely honest with you. And then it dawned on me that it's Saturday. Normally when you have a late night watching MMA, the following day is a Sunday. You can sort of shut down a little bit and sort of try and regather yourself before the start of the week. Well, this was Saturday, which meant we had UFC 211 on Saturday night. So I stupidly didn't get a tactical sleep in later in the day. I powered through, and by the end of it, I was a mess. I'm not going to lie to you. I was an absolute mess. But it was worth it because UFC 211 was absolutely nuts. We had the heavyweight title on the line, we had the strawweight title on the line, and we had a stacked undercard that delivered great action and one or two moments of high controversy, and we'll cover all of that on this week's show. And of course, we'll have our regular listener Q&A section. You've sent us your questions again this week. We always appreciate you sending us your questions. You can do that by tweeting us at the Brit Pack MMA. We will answer those questions tweeted to us this week a bit later on in the show. But there really is only one place to start, and that's the main event in Dallas, Texas. As Stipe Miocic retained the UFC Heavyweight Championship of the world, equalled the record for the most consecutive championship defences of that heavyweight belt with 2. It sounds ridiculous that someone who has basically retained the belt twice has somehow equalled a record, but that is the record in the UFC. Stipe Miocic is now on a hat-trick, and if he can complete the hat-trick, he will go down in UFC history as the single most dominant champion in UFC history. And it feels like he's only had the belt 5 minutes, but that's the truth of the situation. On Saturday night, he took on Junior Dos Santos, the former heavyweight champion of the world, and a man who I confidently predicted would knock out Stipe relatively early on in this contest. What the hell did I know? Junior just didn't seem to go about his game the way I expected him to. I've got to be honest. I expected him to use his jab a lot more. I expected him to be a lot more mobile, and I expected him to keep his back well away from the cage, which he did very successfully against Ben Rothwell. Rothwell is perhaps a much more static opponent than Stipe Miocic. He's a little bit more dynamic, bit more forward pushing, if you like. And Junior allowed himself to get pushed back on the cage, and he wasn't really firing off the punches. His main tactic seemed to be to really do some damage with his low leg kick to the front leg of Stipe, and it seemed to be paying dividends, to be fair to him. It was doing some damage. Stipe was really feeling it, but once Stipe closed the distance and landed, it was pretty much the first seriously clean shot that he landed, wobbled Junior. Junior ended up down on his knees up against the cage. A few big shots from Stipe on the deck, and that really was it. Fight was called, 2 minutes 22 seconds, TKO finish, and still. Great performance from Stipe Miocic, who really doesn't show any nerves in the octagon these days. You know, you watched him a little earlier in his career. He looked a little anxious to impress, a little anxious to engage and really make his mark. But now this is a guy who I think is very comfortable in his own skin, very comfortable in the knowledge that he is the best heavyweight on the planet right now. And it's going to be really interesting to see where he goes next, because the heavyweight division up until now has really been a bit of an old boys club. You know, we've had the same names hanging around at the top of that heavyweight division for a while. And I think it feels like we're beginning to get to a period of change. Stipe hasn't fought Cain Velasquez yet. And Cain potentially could have been. He's a man who could have been, isn't he, as a UFC heavyweight champion. Injury robbed him of potentially a dominant run at the top of the division, or at least a chance to have a dominant run at the top of the division. You only have to look back at what he did to Brock Lesnar. He absolutely took Brock Lesnar to the cleaners when he took the belt off him and kicked off his reign as UFC heavyweight champion. And whenever he's been fully fit and fully prepared for a fight, he's looked almost untouchable. And the fights he's lost have been when he hasn't been. You know, the Fabricio Verdum loss. You know, the whole sea level Cain joke has become, it's become a meme now. That's a fight I would love to see at some point. I don't know what stage in recovery Cain is in right now. I'm pretty sure he's not ready to come back just yet. Which throws another name into the mix, and that name is someone who hasn't fought for a heavyweight championship just yet. That name is Francis Ngannou. He's now moved over to Las Vegas. He's going to be taking full advantage of the UFC's new headquarters. I understand he's going to be making that at least part of his training base, and I understand he's trying a few gyms out around the Las Vegas area. But this is a guy who, incredibly raw talent, who just exploded onto the scene. I remember watching him. I think it might even have been his UFC debut in Zagreb, Croatia. And they had a lot of heavyweights on that card. I think Junior headlined against Rothwell in the main event. But we also saw the UFC debuts of Francis Ngannou, Curtis Blades, and you know, Ngannou absolutely looks like a monster. And the only thing about him back then was, okay, he looks a bit rough around the edges, looks a bit raw. He's going to need a little bit of seasoning before he gets to the top. But he has absolutely propelled himself up that heavyweight division. He's looked incredibly, incredibly dangerous, very powerful. I was so impressed with the submission finish of, crikey, what's his name? Anthony Hamilton, where he basically grabbed a standing Kimura, dragged the 240-pound man to the mat as if he was just a small child, and made him tap instantly. That, for me, was the moment when we went, okay, this guy could be a serious contender. This isn't just a raw prospect. This is a serious contender now. Then he went in there and absolutely demolished Andrei Arlovski. His next fight is going to be a big one. It's either going to be a number one contender fight, or it's going to be or it's going to be for the belt. I can't see where else they're going to go with him. Stipe versus Ngannou could be huge, and I think Kevin Ioli wrote an article suggesting that, you know, Stipe is really getting up there now as one of the UFC's big stars, and he needs a big opponent, and Ngannou is certainly that. And whether it's Velasquez or whether it's Ngannou, I think that next fight for Miocic is going to be huge. And if Stipe wins that, then, you know, in terms of UFC, then we could argue that Stipe is the best heavyweight we've seen in the UFC, because the quality of fighter, the breadth of skill set, the levels of cardio are so much higher in the heavyweight division now than they ever were. And I think we've got a more finely evolved athlete now at the top of the UFC heavyweight division. And Stipe, if he backs that up with 3 back-to-back title defences, then I think he is the top dog in the UFC. I don't think he's in the whole heavyweight greatest of all time conversation just yet. I think he needs to cement his legacy. I think he needs to really clean out the division before we can start talking in the same sort of terms as people like Fedor, Mirko Cro Cop, and people like that, who at their peak were just phenomenal athletes, and were beating virtually everybody. So I think Stipe's got a little ways to go yet before we get to that level of conversation, but he's certainly there in the UFC ranks now as one of the best, if not the best, we've seen under those 3 letters. It was mentioned before this fight about, we've got 2 nice guys competed in this main event. Everybody knows what a lovely guy Junior Dos Santos is, It was impossible not to watch him during the open workouts with little Eli Morgan, John's little lad, and not just have that little warm, fuzzy feeling. He is a genuinely lovely guy, and it's sad when you see nice people get knocked down like that. But then on the other side of the coin was another guy who, in Stipe, who is just as nice a bloke. I was really fortunate back in November for Fight Week in UFC 205. A few of the media got invited to a media luncheon. We went to a New York steakhouse, and we sat down and we had lunch with Stipe Miocic. And Stipe, even in this Fight Week, people were sort of having a bit of a dig at him, saying that he's hard to get quotes from, he's difficult to talk to. And in a media setting where it is literally, I'm firing questions at you, I think that's probably true. He is a little withdrawn and within himself, and that's fine. But you get him in a social setting as we did in New York, and honestly, he was an absolute riot. He's such a funny guy, just sharing stories about his career, life at the fire station, everything, all sorts of weird and wonderful tales he was telling us. He's a really funny guy. You watch him on Twitter, he's really entertaining on Twitter. That's the real Stipe. And I think that the longer he stays at the top in the sport, the more relaxed he'll get with the media, and hopefully we'll get to see more of Stipe's personality, because he's got one, and it's a great one, and I think people need to see more of it. So hopefully we can coax a little more of that out of him in the weeks and months to come. But a great man and a great fighter to have in that position as the UFC's undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. But that wasn't the only world championship on the line at UFC 211 in Dallas this past weekend. Joanna Jedrzejczyk, Joanna champion, as we've grown to call her, defeated Jessica Andrade by unanimous decision, as lopsided a decision as you could possibly hope for. 50-45, 50-44, and 50-45. Now, that's not to say that Jessica Andrade did nothing in that fight. She pushed forward from minute 1 to minute 25. She went in there and left everything she had in there. She was just outclassed. And that's absolutely no criticism of Jessica Andrade, who earned her title shot with some really, really impressive performances inside the octagon. But we really have to start talking about Joanna Jedrzejczyk as a pound-for-pound great now. I think I said on the MMA Roadshow a few months back, it might even have been last year, it might even have been in New York. I think we did a thing in New York, and I think Joanna was fighting Carolina on that card, and I said to John Morgan on the MMA Roadshow, I had Joanna in top 3 pound for pound in the UFC at that point. And honestly, I see nothing to change that. And she's just that good. And there's been a suggestion online. I know some other members of the media have said that people have contacted. I think Luke Thomas might have mentioned it. Said that some people have privately contacted him and said that Joanna doesn't finish enough fights, and that's why they're not so keen. And other people have gone on Twitter and said, well, she's not knocking anybody out. Well, how many women's strawweight fighters are actually knocking people out? These are very small athletes. They're not big, heavy, sort of heavy set, muscular, powerful athletes who go in there and starch people with one shot. I'm assuming the people who aren't that enamoured with watching Joanna Jedrzejczyk fight are the same people who can't get excited for a Demetrius Johnson fight, because both in their own way, they are the 2 most dominant champions in the UFC. Point blank, they are the 2 most dominant champions in the UFC. And Demetrius Johnson will beat you any which way you like. If you're a wrestler, he doesn't care. He'll out-wrestle you. You're a striker, he doesn't care. He'll outstrike you. And he'll do it faster, quicker, slicker, with better technique than you, to the point that by the end of the fight, you have to hold your hands up and say, wow, that guy is the best in the world. Joanna is slightly different. Joanna has her skill set. Her skill set is Muay Thai. and nobody has been able to penetrate that yet. Claudia Gadelha tried, had a teeny bit of success early on, but over a 5-round fight, Joanna pulled clear and beat her comfortably. Karolina Kowalkiewicz decided to fight fire with fire, stood and traded. Perhaps didn't quite have the belief early on that she could really take on Joanna, and as the fight went on, she kind of grew into it and she had more success. But at the end of the day, Joanna was the one who fought at full throttle for the entire fight. And no one yet has been able to keep pace with her. No one's been able to stand toe-to-toe with her over 5-minute rounds. And that is why she is the best in the world. You look at people, sort of champions elsewhere in MMA. You look at Ben Askren. Ben Askren is just a prodigious wrestler, and that's his thing. And if he got involved in a striking match with some of the best welterweights in the world, and it was purely striking, he might find himself in trouble because striking isn't his number one thing. But in mixed martial arts, you have the facility to use whatever skill set you choose and whatever skill set you deem most appropriate for that particular moment in the fight. And with someone like Askren, if you can't solve the Askren wrestling puzzle, you're screwed. And it's exactly the same with Joanna Jedrzejczyk. If you can't deal with Joanna Jedrzejczyk's stand-up, then you've got a problem. And I think really she's not cleaned out the division yet by any stretch. There's probably some other fights in there you could make for her, but she is as dominant a champion as we've got in the UFC right now. And I'll tell you something, she's already got her eyes on that 125-pound belt. That tough season that the UFC are planning, she'll just be sitting back and watching it and going, okay, you girls fight it out in the house, determine who the champion is, and then I'll step in and take the belt off you. Guaranteed that's what she's thinking. And you know what? I think that's what she'll do as well. I think she will be a 2-weight UFC world champion. I think the interesting dynamic, if that happens, if Joanna does go up to 125, it will open up a whole load of new matches for her against people who potentially could have fought at 135 previously. I know Jessica Andrade fought at 135 previously, but she was very small at 135. And even in the title fight with Joanna, she looked almost a weight class small. I mean, she's very, very strong and very muscular, but from a height and reach point of view, it was a huge difference with Joanna. So I think Joanna versus a few of these 135ers who might move down to have a crack at 125, I think that opens up a whole new set of tests for her. And if she can basically replicate the success at 125 that she's having at 115, then you really have got someone who you're not just talking top 3, you might be talking top 2, or right up there challenging Demetrius Johnson. Demetrius has obviously got the longevity in his favour, but he's done it in one weight class. As good as he is, he's done it in one weight class. If Joanna can be dominant in 2 weight classes, and I'm not talking winning championships in two weight classes, I'm talking dominant in 2 weight classes, that is becoming champion and beating challengers, then she might have a claim for being the number 1 pound for pound fighter in the world. Now, it'll be an interesting conversation to have a bit further down the line if Joanna does indeed capture that 125 pound title, maybe later this year, maybe early 2018. But watch this space for Joanna champion. We might have to start calling her Joanna double champion in a not too distant future. Great performance from her though. 50-45, 50-44, 50-45. So that's the 2 world championship fights done. And we now know who will face, or at least we think we do, who will face Tyron Woodley next. Because Damian Maia defeated Jorge Masvidal via split decision, 29-28 each way, and then a third card, 29-28 in favour of Maia, giving him the split decision win. Tough fight this, because Masvidal found himself on the defensive as Maia was looking to grapple, as he does for most of the fight. Masvidal did a good job of nullifying a lot of Maia's grappling, but he was in constant danger throughout. When the fight was in the stand-up, Masvidal was dominating the stand-up. So what you're doing normally when you're scoring a fight, you have to it's the combination of striking and grappling, and you decide based on the striking and grappling on each side of the coin who did best, and that then helps you to determine who wins the round. But this is a really interesting issue here, because, and it's one that I think I might well hit up Ben Cartledge, who is a very, very experienced judge of MMA and is a regular on the European circuit and judges UFC events as well, and very, very well respected in the sport. Because what we had here, normally you're saying, okay, this person striking and grappling versus this person striking and grappling, but you didn't really have that in this fight, because Maia basically didn't strike and Masvidal basically didn't grapple in terms of any kind of attacking. So what you're trying to judge is, what was the more pervading thing in the fight? Was it Maia's grappling, or was it Masvidal's striking? And how do you directly compare the two? Because it's apples and oranges at that point. And it was clearly something that the three judges weren't 100% in line, because one of the judges obviously decided that Masvidal's striking was weighted significantly over Maia's grappling. And, you know, people talk about damage and impact and things like that in the scoring criteria. I think that the terminology is impact. But grappling by nature doesn't deliver impact or damage, where striking does. So in that respect, some of the wording is almost lopsided towards the striking. I think it's a really interesting discussion point. And I'll probably get in touch with Ben Cartledge just to, for as much as anything, to get educated on how judges go about this, because everyone's a flipping armchair judge when they're watching fights. I'm no different. I try and score fights as closely to how I think a judge will do it, but I'm not a judge. I'm not a qualified judge, and it's always good to get the guidance of and opinion from people who are. But I thought that was very interesting, because you were basically judging Maia's grappling versus Masvidal's striking. Apples versus oranges, and apples won by split decision. Damian Maia gets the nod. Personally, I thought that was the right call. I thought Damian Maia was the dominant fighter over the sort of the larger period of the fight, if you like. Straight after the fight, he went over to the cage and had a very, very quick conversation with Dana White. Basically said, look, I've got this winning streak. I've won more fights in the UFC than any Brazilian ever. Please, can I have my title shot now? And Dana White said, you got it. Now, we've also now got the issue of Georges St. Pierre, who's not going to be fighting Michael Bisping. And there has been a suggestion that GSP's return will now be at 170. And you can bet that Tyron Woodley, if you give him the opportunity to choose, he's going to pick Georges St. Pierre, because he's not an idiot. Because Georges St. Pierre means two things. It means dollar bills, and it means fighting a guy that hasn't fought in 3 years. That is an absolute no-brainer decision if you're Tyron Woodley. Sucks if you're Damian Maia. But Damian Maia did say after the fight that he wants to take some time away. He's got loads of seminars that he needs to do back home in Brazil. And he needs to just take a little bit of a break. So it might actually all work out rather nicely for everyone concerned. Tyron Woodley will get the big money fight that we know that he wants. He can fight Georges St. Pierre, who gets the comeback fight that he wants and gets the opportunity. And this is a far more compelling story than the Bisping fight for me anyway, because now we've got the narrative of Georges St. Pierre coming back to the welterweight division to reclaim the belt that he never lost against the current world champion. That, to me, is the perfect scenario for his comeback. I think that's the comeback that he should always have been gunning for in the first place, my opinion. That might well be the way it goes now. International Fight Week, or just after International Fight Week, maybe we can see that fight happen. I think that would be fantastic. As for Damian Maia, he can then be going away, doing everything he needs to do, recharge his batteries, fulfill all of his seminar obligations back home in Brazil. Woodley and GSP can do their thing in July, early August time. Then Maia can come back in the autumn, take on the winner, get his deserved title shot, and the welterweight division is rolling once again. I think that makes absolute sense for everybody concerned, and everything pieces together quite nicely. Let's hope that that is what happens, and we don't get any more spanners in the works or anything like that, or injuries or issues, or last thing we need is another flipping interim title thrown into the mix. So if you're Tyron Woodley, you want to get back in the cage as soon as possible and beat someone decisively, because those two fights with Wonderboy Thompson, sometimes you see these fights where people just cancel each other out, and that was one of those, and it didn't really leave us completely satisfied at the end of either one of them, and that's no downer on Wonderboy or Tyron Woodley, but you like to see clear, decisive results in these things, and we didn't really get that, but we did have two fights between the two, and Woodley came out on top, so he moves on, and fingers crossed he'll get GSP next. At least that's what I'd like to see. Now, the next fight on the UFC 211 card was the one fight I was looking forward to more than any other. Frankie Edgar, Yair Rodriguez, the super prospect versus, for me, the legend in waiting, Frankie Edgar. For me, he's always been in my top 2 or 3 favourite fighters to watch in the UFC. If you're fighting Frankie Edgar, you better bring your lunch, because even if you think you can hurt him, hurting him is one thing. Finishing him is something entirely different. Just talk to Gray Maynard. The thing that struck us during fight week was the size differential was really huge. I mean, Frankie Edgar was a former UFC lightweight champion of the world. They're fighting at featherweight, and Rodriguez looked a good weight class bigger than Frankie Edgar. So how Yair gets down to 145, I'll never know. But he looks relatively healthy doing it. He doesn't look... you see what Conor used to look like on the scales towards the end of his featherweight run. He looked bad on the scales. Yair didn't look that terrible. So he's still young, and he's probably still growing into his body a little bit. I fully expect that he will end up at 155, but right now he's at 145. And this was a real watershed fight for him. This was the fight that really would determine whether he was ready for a title shot. The UFC looking for a big event coming up in Mexico. I think Yair was possibly being penciled in as a potential title contender had he got past Frankie Edgar. You can imagine Yair versus Aldo in Mexico would be a huge deal, or even Yair versus Max Holloway would be a big title fight down there. So what we did know, Yair had a huge pop from the crowd. There was a lot of Frankie Edgar fans in that building as well on Saturday night, and when the fight started, it was really interesting to see how Frankie would deal with the superior reach of Yair Rodriguez, and also the fact that Yair loves throwing kicks, which just extends that reach even further. And he's not the sort of fighter who just puts his kicks out there. He snaps them out there and brings them back very quick. So, wrestlers quite often see fighters who like to kick. They quite often see kicks as an opportunity for takedowns. But someone like Yair, who throws with such power and speed, it's not always as easy to be able to grab a kick from someone like Yair Rodriguez or someone like Edson Barbosa, because those kicks are going to do some damage. But Frankie Edgar did exactly what I thought he would do. In last week's show, I told Sandhu that Edgar would win this fight, and he did exactly what I thought he would do. Closed the distance, got his hands on Yair, and basically beat him up. Took him to the mat and beat him up. And we saw at that point that mixed martial arts at UFC level it really is about levels, and there's a big difference between being a hot prospect and being a legitimate world elite level fighter, and we saw that. Yair isn't yet an elite level world championship caliber fighter. I'm sure he will be, and I think this fight will be a real benefit to him. And I think if he looks back on it in like 3, 4, 5 years time, I expect he'll point to this fight as a bit of a turning point for him, because this was where real life really did kick in for Yair Rodriguez, and Frankie Edgar really did hand his backside to him for as long as the fight lasted. It ended up stopped at the end of the second round. The doctor in the end called a stop to it. I think Rodriguez's left eye was completely shut. He wanted to carry on. All credit to him, but also credit to the Octagon side physician who made, I think, the correct call, because that fight was a fight that really Rodriguez was showing zero sign of winning. He was outclassed. He was getting beat up, and he was getting busted up as well. And I think in situations like that, there really is no reason to send him back out there for another 5 minutes of punishment. So I think that was probably the right call. And Rodriguez will go back to the drawing board. He will address these holes in his game. I'm sure he's still only young. Frankie Edgar, meanwhile, has proved that he ain't going anywhere just yet. You know, he might be in his mid-30s, but he can still throw down with the best of them. And he's very much a legitimate contender for that UFC featherweight championship as he bids to become a two-weight world champion in the UFC. If Max Holloway beats Jose Aldo, I book Frankie Edgar into a title fight straight away. If Jose Aldo beats Max Holloway, it becomes a little trickier because we've seen that Edgar-Aldo fight twice before, and Aldo has won both of them relatively handily, sort of cruising to points decisions on both occasions. But Frankie versus Max Holloway would be a great fight. So if you're a fan of seeing Frankie Edgar go for that title, I guess you're cheering Max Holloway on when he fights Jose Aldo. But that's going to be one hell of a fight either way. And if you're Frankie, I think you're going to be pulling for the Hawaiian because I think he's the best chance he's got of getting a shot at the UFC Featherweight Championship. The other fight, to kick off the main card, was David Branch versus Krzysztof Jotko. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. The fight finishes a split decision, 29-28 either way. And then the third card, 29-28 in favour of the former World Series of Fighting two-weight champ, who gets a good win at the start of his new UFC career. He fought in UFC before, but he's now back as a former two-weight world champion, World Series. Takes on a top 10 guy, a tricky guy in Krzysztof Jotko. Gets the split decision win. I've got to be honest, at that point in the night, I was struggling. And my ability to score that fight was completely gone. The eyelids were going. I had to load up on some espresso so that I could get through the rest of the night. So I didn't have my eyes 100% fixed on that particular matchup. But good to see a veteran like David Branch jumping back in and proving that he can hang with a very tricky European opponent in Krzysztof Jotko. The preliminary card, we had some great fights on the prelims were outstanding. The fight past prelims not so much, but the TV prelims that we had on BT Sport here in the UK and on FX in the States, they all had incredible matchups. We'll go bottom to top. James Vick versus Marco Polo Reyes. Vic looked superb against Polo Reyes. TKOing him with punches. Beautiful combination to drop him and finish him. Did that in just over 2.5 minutes of the first round. Nice little promo on the microphone as well from James Vick. We do like that here at the Brit Pack, where the fighters get that mic time and really do make it count. And he did. So he deserves a move up, definitely. I think a lot of people were surprised to see him against Polo Reyes rather than a higher ranked opponent. Hopefully now we will see him get that push and maybe stick him in there with a top 15 guy, or maybe even a top 10 guy next time, because I think he's deserved that opportunity now. But that lightweight division is a shark tank, so anybody he gets in that top 15 is going to be a real test for him. And if he wins that, onwards and upwards for the Texecutioner James Vick. At heavyweight, we saw the fight of the night. Chase Sherman versus Rashad Coulter. Second round knockout from a short elbow, but that really doesn't tell the story of this fight. The first round of this fight was all about Chase Sherman just picking Rashad Coulter apart. Really nice, slick, relatively good technical striking, I thought. Just popping stuff out. Using the jab better than we see from most heavyweights. He was just constantly ping, ping, ping. Just putting those knuckles in Coulter's face constantly for 5 rounds. Then in the second round, all hell broke loose. It was as if it was like, okay, we're not going to worry about technique anymore. We are just going to throw down. And the pair of them were absolutely spent physically, and they were throwing the kitchen sink at each other. It became one of those fights where technique went out the window, and it was all about how big your stones were. And both the guys really did go for it. And to see Coulter on his UFC debut, I think he'd stepped in at like a week's notice or something like that, 2 weeks' notice, against Sherman, who himself had stepped in at short notice, but slightly earlier on. To see them both absolutely empty the chamber and go for it like that was phenomenal, and the crowd absolutely loved it. And a fun post-fight interview again from Chase Sherman, gave a lot of credit to Rashad Coulter for stepping in there and doing what he did. That got $50,000 bonus checks sent in the direction of both those guys. And if you're Rashad Coulter in particular, coming in for your UFC debut, I understand he lost his job in the lead up to this fight. A $50,000 paycheck on top of whatever he earned for his debut. I'm assuming he would have been on 10 and 10 or 12 and 12. So $62,000 paycheck, and he lost. I think he'll be quite happy with his night's work, even though the fight didn't go his way. Great performance from them, and a great performance too from the man known among the media as Hick Diaz. Jason the Kid Knight against Chaz Skelly. This was my sleeper pick for fight of the night, and on many other occasions it might well have got it. That Sherman Coulter fight pipped it, but Knight versus Skelly was a cracking scrap, and it went all the way to the third round. Real back and forth stuff. Lot of respect between the two of them, which was good to see. Jason Knight getting the job done, TKO finish. I don't think Chaz Skelly had ever been finished prior to that fight, so that was a real statement victory for Jason Knight, and I think there's big things in his future at UFC, at the 145-pound division. Always looking for new talent to push, people with interesting storylines, interesting backgrounds, and Jason Knight has got all of those in abundance. So, and the other thing, he's entertaining to watch. So, looking forward to seeing where they push Jason Knight next. Wherever it is, I'll be tuning in for sure, because he is a very exciting up-and-coming fighter in that 145-pound division. That then led on to the featured prelim, the FX prelim, or BT Sport 2 prelim as it was here in the UK. Eddie Alvarez, a former lightweight champion of the world, against Dustin Poirier, former contender in the featherweight division and current contender in the lightweight division. Really, really big fight for the division, this. A fight that a lot of people were really looking forward to, myself included. And unfortunately, an unfortunate set of events robbed us of what I think could have been an instant classic, because it was certainly heading that way. Alvarez and Poirier just went at it. They went at it. It was a fantastic fight. And at some point, Poirier ended up grounded. He had one hand down, and obviously both feet on the canvas. We were using the old unified rules as opposed to the new unified rules. So one hand is plenty enough to be a down fighter. And Alvarez hit him with a knee to the head when he had one hand down. So that's an illegal knee. After that knee, Poirier then dropped to one knee himself. So he then had hand on the mat, foot on the mat, knee on the mat. So he's even more clearly grounded the second time round. Alvarez then hits him with another knee. That knee really did connect. At that point, Herb Dean paused the fight. Illegal knee. Now, to me, this is a cut and dry situation. Eddie Alvarez should have been disqualified for illegal knees. And I love Eddie Alvarez. I think he's a great fighter. He's one of my favourite fighters to watch. And I know he's an honest fighter as well. And he wouldn't have done it deliberately, I'm sure of that. I think he's just in the zone. Fighters are now expected to try and remember what rule set they're fighting under from event to event, and that's unfair on the fighter. And Eddie Alvarez was fighting under the old unified rules. Even if he was fighting under the new unified rules, the second knee was still illegal, and that was the knee that really did the damage on Dustin Poirier. And what happened at that point was the fight was paused, and they got the doctors in to check over Dustin Poirier, who was clearly affected by that second knee. It sort of smashed him just to the side of the eye there. Might even have done some orbital damage, I don't know. Poirier said he couldn't see properly. And so they stopped the fight. That was the first thing. everyone was disappointed because what was shaping up to be an absolute cracker of a fight was cut short in its prime. Then we had the confusion over what they were going to do with the decision. Now, for me, it looked obvious. Illegal knees, 2 of them. Now, I don't know whether they were allowed instant replay or not, but what we do know was that the fight was stopped for an illegal knee. So, to me, Herb Dean has seen the foul, and to the best of my knowledge, I don't think intent has anything to do with it. If you commit a foul, you commit a foul. And it was ruled an accidental foul, and therefore it was ruled as a no contest. I don't get that. Like, I can understand like an accidental eye poke or something like that, because, you know, there's slightly more involved there. But if you're kneeing someone in the head, you're intending to knee them in the head. You know, a stray finger can go in an eye. I understand that. But that wasn't a stray knee that went into the side of Dustin Poirier's head. That knee was deliberate. You know, Eddie Alvarez threw it, therefore it's deliberate. Now, the issue then is, was it an illegal knee or was it a legal knee? Well, it was illegal because Dustin Poirier was down. He actually landed 2, but the one that it was stopped for was the second one, and that's enough. The fight should have been ruled as a disqualification to Eddie Alvarez and Dustin Poirier winning the fight. Now, that isn't how it went. It ended up as a no contest. Dustin Poirier, I think, is appealing. I think he wants to get his win bonus, and that's fair enough. I think he deserves it, insofar as that decision wasn't a fair reflection of what happened. It's hard on Eddie Alvarez just because, you know, he did commit the foul. I don't believe there was any malice or intent to throw an illegal knee. There was an intent to throw a knee, all right, because he sure as hell threw it. But I do think that asking fighters to fight under different rule sets from city to city, state to state, event to event, it's unfair on the fighters. And what it does is it makes a mockery of the sport. Regulation of this sport is absolutely crucial. Absolutely crucial. But you've got to be consistent. If the rules aren't consistent, you haven't got a proper sport. You need to have a consistent sport. You don't watch a Premier League game and you go, oh, right, we're playing in Manchester this week. Actually, this is kind of a funny example. I was going to say, we're playing in Manchester this week, so we're playing 98 minutes every week. It used to be like that when Alex Ferguson was the manager. But that wasn't an official rule change. That's Fergie time. Any football fans out there will know exactly what I'm talking about. But what I'm saying is, you need to have the same rule set wherever that octagon lands. And this is where it gets tricky, because the UFC can't self-regulate in the States. They have to go by the rules of the athletic commissions. It would be far, far better for the sport. It would be far, far better for the athletic commissions, and much, much better for the athletes as well, and for the UFC. We need one rule set. That's why it's called the unified rules. Right now, we don't have unified rules. We have 2 sets of rules that both have the term unified, but because they both exist, there's no unification whatsoever. It's, okay, we're in Texas, so we're going with this rule set. We're in California, so we're doing this. We're in New Jersey, so we're doing that. And it doesn't make any sense. Someone somewhere has to get all of these commissions into a room and say, look, this has to be knocked into shape. We need to have one set of rules. It's better to have one consistent set of rules that we're 95% happy with than having one set that we're 100% happy with that we can only use in 3 states in America. It makes no sense. Have a consistent set of rules, and then hopefully there'll be less confusion. We'll have less controversial incidents like we had in the Alvarez-Poirier fight, and fight results will be far more legitimate and consistent than they are in situations like this. Went on a little bit of a mini rant there, but I think you probably get what I'm going for there. We just need consistency. That's all we need. We just need consistency. So that was UFC 211. Just to quickly put a bow on this, the 3 Fight Pass prelims. Courtney Casey defeated Jessica Aguilar by unanimous decision. Very, very, very impressed with Courtney Casey. She just seems to be getting better and better. I remember her first fight in the UFC. I think it was a short notice debut against Joanne Calderwood in Scotland. She lost that, but she showed pretty well in that fight as well. She really did bring the best out of JoJo on that night. And I know from talking to John Morgan, who I believe called some of Courtney's early fights, or was at least present at some of them. He thought that she would, she had the toughness to really stick around in that UFC strawweight division, and she's certainly proving that against Jessica Aguilar, who, when they first formed the division, was considered one of the best fighters at that weight. And Casey gets the decision 30-27s across the board. She deserves a move up now, and deserves to be fighting somewhere other than the Fight Pass prelims, I would suggest. Enrique Barzola versus Gabriel Benitez. This was an entertaining scrap at featherweight. Two tough Latin America guys going at it. It looked to me like Benitez was doing all right in the first round. I thought he won the first round. And then Barzola started to take over. Got the unanimous decision win, winning rounds 2 and 3, I would assume, on the judges' scorecards, because Benitez looked good in that opening round. But Barzola mixed up his game really well, switching up takedowns with striking. Benitez was looking good in the striking department, but Barzola had that mix of skills in his game and really did bring those to bear, and got a deserved win, I thought, on the scorecards, 29-28 across the board for the Peruvian. And the opening fight of the night, and here's my attempt at the most difficult name to pronounce on the card. Gadzimurad Antigulov defeated Joachim Christensen by first round submission, rear naked choke. Very impressive, good finish, and I'm sure we will see him on some European fight cards as the year goes on. Makes sense to me. Get a European guy on the European cards, although I believe he lives and trains in the States. But I wouldn't be at all surprised to see him flown over for some of these European cards. We need another light heavyweight star or contender. We've been talking about it in recent weeks. The UFC 205 pound division could do with some fresh blood and some new talent. And Antigulov looks like he might be one of them. So keep your eyes on him, because that didn't look too shabby in the first fight of the night. So there you go. UFC 211 in the books from Dallas, Texas. If you want the numbers, there were 17,834 people in the American Airlines Center for a total gate of $2.66 million. Big fight card. I think it delivered. We had a couple of little issues. Performance of the night went to Stipe Miocic, 50 grand. Jason Knight, 50 grand. And as we mentioned earlier, fight of the night, Chase Sherman, Rashad Coulter. Take a bow, gents. Have a nice bath, but do it with the knowledge you have got 50 G's heading into your respective bank accounts, and very, very well deserved they are too. That's UFC 211. Now, we are in the beginning of Fight Week here in the UK. That is because Bellator are here in the UK for Bellator 179 Daly versus McDonald. The main card, unfortunately, we've lost our co-main event, and honestly, I'm absolutely gutted about this. Michael Venom Page sustained an injury. He's off the card. That fight with Derek Anderson, I was looking forward to that. I thought that was going to be a really nice test for MVP. But that fight is off the card, so we've had a little bit of a rejig. So we'll run you through the main card, because that is the only bit of the card we're going to see on TV. The main event, Paul Semtex Daly against Rory MacDonald. How many fights has Paul Semtex Daly had? Look at this, 39 wins, 14 losses, and 2 draws against Rory MacDonald, who is 18-4. Rory Mac, obviously, this is going to be his Bellator MMA debut, having switched promotions, having left the UFC and signed what I can only assume is a chunky-looking contract with Bellator MMA. He's got his eyes set on that Bellator MMA welterweight championship belt, but so does Paul Daly, and the winner of this, according to Scott Coker, will get the next shot at Douglas Lima and that Bellator welterweight belt. That's the main event. The light heavyweight feature bout, as it's called here, that's going to be the co-main. Liam McGeary, Linton Vassell, Battle of Britain at 205 pounds. Two really strong, tough guys who know their way around on the mat. McGeary, we know about his jiu-jitsu, 12-1. His only losses to the champ. Linton Vassell, 17-5. He's been a constant threat at 205 pounds in that light heavyweight division. Always been there or thereabouts. If he beats Liam McGeary on Friday night, he's right up there with a shot at the championship. So, really important fight. Big fight between two British fighters at light heavyweight. Also on the card, a familiar face to people who have been watching MMA for the last 10 years or so. Czech Congo, the big Frenchman, used to train out of the UK. I don't know if he does anymore. He's 26-10 with 2 draws, taking on Augusto Sakai, who is 9-0-1. So Sakai coming in with a little bit of momentum, undefeated in his 10-fight career, but he's taking on a very, very experienced guy in Czech Congo. So we look forward to seeing that one. And a nice story in the welterweight prelim. Kevin Ferguson Jr., better known to the world of MMA as Baby Slice, of course, the son of the sadly departed Kevin Ferguson Sr., better known as Kimbo Slice. Kimbo was due to fight in London last year, and unfortunately, we never got to see him, and he passed away sadly last year. But his son will continue the legacy. Baby Slice will step into the cage for only his second professional bout. He lost his debut, but he's looking to get his first ever professional win in London against debutant DJ Griffin. So looking forward to seeing that. That'll be an emotional fight, I think, and certainly the story of Kevin Ferguson Jr. I don't think anyone's painting him out to be a world champion or anything, but I think there's a human interest story there for sure, and I know a lot of people will be pulling for him when he steps in there against DJ Griffin on Friday night. Also scheduled for the main card is a prelim bout. It's just prelim bout, but it's been listed here on my mail out from Bellator as being on the main card. Dan Vinny against Alex Lahore. On paper, this looks like a win for Alex Lahore. He's 10-1 against Dan Vinny, who has a 50-50 record, 14-14. So make of that what you will. That may well kick off the main card. Either that, or it might be a float fight. They might put that on after the main event is finished. Who knows? They sometimes do that. So yeah, that's your main card. Other notable names in action: we've got Stav Economou, who has been a bit of a veteran of the UK scene, fighting heavyweight against Rob Beach. Who else? We've got Chase Morton taking on Jeremy Petley in a 150-pound catchweight fight. Neil Grove, the Goliath, the big South African, he's in action against Lucas Parobic in a heavyweight prelim fight. And we've got a packed night of fights there, but it really is all about, I think, those top 4 fights. Baby Slice, then Czech Congo, then McGeary versus Vassell in the co-main, and then, of course, the big one, Paul Semtex Daly versus Rory MacDonald. Sandhu will be on site all week this week with our friend Abby Saban. They'll be shooting interviews throughout fight week, so do be sure to check those out on MMA Junkie. I will be on editing duty this week for MMA Junkie, so you'll be able to read my write-ups during fight week, during the early part of fight week, and then on fight night itself I will be there at Cageside, and I'll be doing a live blog from my website MMA365.com. Please do check that out. That's a little holding pen for all my writing stuff, but I will also be doing some bits and bobs for MMA Junkie during fight week as well, so please do be sure to check that out as well. Now, before we go, it's Q&A time, so I will fire up my Twitter machine and we will take a look at the questions that we've had this week. Do you think, says Sam Ribeiro, do you think Bisping will end up fighting Yoel Romero and GSP will end up fighting Anderson Silva? Well, Sam, I don't think GSP will end up fighting Anderson Silva. That's a fight that I think makes a lot of sense to a lot of people. GSP says that Anderson Silva isn't where he was in the past. I think from a business standpoint, GSP doesn't think Silva's a big enough fight anymore. It's a bit of a slap in the face if you're Anderson Silva, given that he's at least been in the UFC and has been active. And GSP hasn't, and GSP's coming back and saying that Silva's stock has fallen. It's a bit cheeky. It's partly accurate, but GSP's stock arguably has dropped as well because he hasn't been fighting. So for me, that's a makeable fight, but I don't think they'll make it. I think they will go for the Tyron Woodley fight. I think that's a fight that Tyron Woodley wants. I think it's a fight that GSP, if you can't get that middleweight fight with Bisping, I think the next best option is a fight with Tyron Woodley to go for his old belt again. I think that makes a lot of sense. That's the fight I think we'll get. As for Michael Bisping, I think the Yoel Romero fight is absolutely the next fight now. If it isn't GSP, then really has to be Yoel Romero, doesn't it? I don't know. I mean, unless something happens with Romero in the interim, whether he picks up an injury or something, I think Bisping really does have to defend against Yoel Romero. I think Romero is number one contender right now, controversial though he is. But that's the fight. And I'll tell you this, this is the Brit Pack Podcast, and Yoel Romero has opened up as like a 2-1 favourite, I think, in the betting against Bisping on some of the Vegas sports books, and I think that makes sense. He's a big, strong, powerful guy. But I'll tell you this, if Michael Bisping gets through the first 2 rounds against Yoel Romero in a 5-round title fight, expect that momentum to swing fully in the Count's favour. He has cardio for days. Romero has cardio for minutes. So I think that's going to be the tipping point in that fight. Romero will be incredibly dangerous in the first 10 minutes of that fight. But if Bisping keeps on his bike for 10 minutes, keeps out of harm's way, and is still there and still in reasonable nick as we head into the third, I think Bisping will win it running away on the scorecards, or maybe even will stop him late. So I think that is a fascinating contest. I know a lot of people have just jumped on the Romero will absolutely destroy Bisping. It's possible. It's possible that Romero could get Bisping early. And Romero has the sort of power that if he gets you early, he could finish you. He can finish pretty much anybody in that middleweight division if he catches him. But Bisping is a very, very smart guy. He's been around the block many, many times. And he's been in there with some of the best fighters in the world. He's been in there and he's had to deal with all sorts of different fighting styles. And he will have a game plan for Yoel Romero. If he gets out of the second round, I'll be putting my money on Michael Bisping. But he's got to get through those 2 rounds first. It's a fascinating contest. I'm really looking forward to it. But yeah, I do think that's the fight that is going to be next for the Count, Michael Bisping. Let's scroll down the Twitter feed a little bit further. Here we go. Wayne Corey, I need to pronounce that properly. That could be dodgy. On Twitter has asked, I'm running out of superlatives to describe Frankie. What longevity to be at the top for so long? Completely agree with you. I know that isn't technically a question, but it's a comment worth mentioning. For me, he is an absolute nailed-on, copper-bottom Hall of Famer. The minute he hangs those gloves up, if he isn't put in the Hall of Fame, the very next time the Hall of Fame comes up, then it is a travesty. He is, for me, what the UFC is all about. He will fight anybody at any weight, pretty much, and he will go in there and he'll scrap it out with anybody. But he isn't just a mindless brawler. He's technical. He's got great slick boxing. He's got excellent wrestling. He's got underrated submissions. And he's got conditioning that is the envy of anybody in that division, even though he's in his mid-30s. So, Frankie Edgar, for me, he's one of the best. He is one of the best. And he's an absolute nailed-on cert as a UFC Hall of Famer. And he's not done yet. I think he's still got another title running him, as he proved this past weekend. Wayne then followed up with a question. After Poirier versus Alvarez, surely it's a time for instant replays. Yes. Absolutely. And I think there are certain states that allow instant replays, and there are others that don't. And I think my view on instant replays is, if you are artificially stopping the action in order to use it, you shouldn't use it. And we take soccer as a great example. I was a football journalist for 15 years before I started covering MMA, and video replays has always been a hot topic of discussion within the world of soccer or football. I say soccer because I know we get Americans listening to this, but I've always been of the view that if the ball is out of play and the game is effectively dead, why not use the instant replay? It's fine. You don't stop the game to use it, but if the game's stopped and you've got the facility and it's of a certain, it's a certain sort of decision, statements of fact, was the ball over the line or not, things like that, was an offence inside or outside of the penalty area, things like that. If the game has been stopped, then I think you can use replay. And in fight sports like MMA, absolutely we should be using instant replay. Absolutely we should be. If a referee pauses about, not stops about, pauses about, so they call a halt to the action, they've not ended the contest, so they believe a foul has been committed. And if it's a foul that then goes on to end a fight, as it did on Saturday, I think the officials should have the facility to double check and to see, because if you're making a decision between, okay, is it a no contest, is it a TKO, is it a disqualification, because any one of those things could occur. So for example, if Poirier was unable to continue the fight as a result of that knee, and it was a legal knee, then technically that fight should have been ruled as a TKO stoppage for Eddie Alvarez. If it had been an illegal knee and Poirier couldn't continue the fight, as it was, it should have been ruled as a disqualification and therefore a win to Dustin Poirier. So, and if it had been like an accidental eye poke, let's say, because you can, I think it's easy to rule those whether they're accidental or deliberate, then maybe there's a grey area. My opinion, I don't think there should ever be scope for whether something's accidental or not. I think it's either a foul or it isn't. People know the legal targets they can hit, and they know the areas that they can't, and they also know the times during a fight when you can and can't hit certain parts of the body. So all of that's laid out in advance. So it should be cut and dried. It should be black and white. If you hit someone with an illegal knee, you've hit them with an illegal knee, and if the fight finishes as a result of that, then unfortunately that falls on you, and you end up disqualified for that. But yeah, if the referee has access to instant replay, that makes their job better. It makes their job easier. And why not? I mean, these guys have got split seconds to make decisions, and they're often looking at different aspects of the exchange. So they might be looking at the fighter's eyes to check that they're still compos mentis, and they might not be able to tell whether a fighter's hand is down or whether it's just off the ground, and stuff like that. It's almost impossible to expect a referee to see absolutely everything first time in live running. So to be able to do that with an instant replay, just to make sure that we get the right decisions, I think we should. I think that makes total sense. So yeah, instant replays. And that falls into what I was saying earlier about we need a legitimately unified set of rules. Where are we? Let's have a look. Okay, Nixon Speaks has tweeted us. With the UFC Fighter Summit approaching, which fighters do you expect to be getting an added push from the UFC moving forward? Well, that's an interesting way you frame that question. The UFC Fighter Summit is something that they do regularly, where they bring all the fighters in. Sometimes they do it in shifts. So one week they'll bring one batch in, and then another week they'll bring another batch in. But they've got this brand new campus now in Vegas. It looks very impressive. They're going to bring the fighters in. They'll sit them down. I'm sure they'll brief them over the direction of the UFC. They'll talk to them about USADA, I'm sure. Allow the fighters to raise any concerns that they have. And it's just an opportunity to help get the best out of the fighters, I guess. And I don't think anything specific from the summit will lead to individual fighters being given an added push. But what I do think is, potentially from this fighter summit, we might start to see the way the UFC push their fighters begin to change. We might see a bit more creativity. You know, WMEI and GR, this is their business. They're in the business of building stars. So I think they've been in there. They've got their feet under the table now. They've been doing this for long enough. Now might well be the time for them to start saying, right, okay, we're going to ramp things up a little bit now. We're coming into the summer. We've got a big showpiece, International Fight Week. And that's normally when the new initiatives tend to kick in, around then. So wouldn't surprise me if we saw some changes. The broadcast might start to look a little different. The way the fighters are being promoted might start to look a little bit different. But yeah, I think in terms of who we expect to get an added push, it's hard to say. I mean, there are the obvious ones. You know, people like Michelle Waterson has been getting a big push. Obviously, she's coming off the back of a loss now. Cody Garbrandt is getting a big push. He's in the middle of a tough season with TJ Dillashaw, although it doesn't look like that title fight is going to happen at International Fight Week. There's a concern over Cody's back, so we'll have to see what happens on that front. I would like to see, this is the Brit Pack again, I'd like to see some fighters from this part of the world getting a push. And Mark Diakiese has star power, and I think he is a prime candidate for someone who the UFC could put a little bit behind and really give a serious push. Cynthia Calvillo is another example of someone who relatively new to the UFC, coming out of a really good team, has impressed hugely in 2 high-profile spots so far in her UFC career. She's made a UFC debut and then her second fight, both of them on the main card of pay-per-views. That's almost unheard of. And she impressed in both outings. So she takes on Jojo Calderwood, and I think it's the co-main event in Glasgow. So that will be a great fight. That will be a really good fight. So, I think it really is. I mean, like if you're a fighter, just be yourself. Be yourself and turn the volume up a little bit on your own personality. Don't try and be something that you're not. Don't try and become a clone of Conor McGregor because it worked for him. Because all that happens is you get called a Conor McGregor clone, and that doesn't do you any good. So just be yourself. Be yourself. Just turn the volume up a bit on your own personality, and people will start to take notice. But it'd be interesting to see what stories come out of the Fighter Summit. What have we got here? Paul James. Other than Manoa, as he's a backup, which other British fighter is closest to being in title contention? This is a good question, because Manoa is clearly, he's the guy. He's one step away. I would say Joanne Calderwood is probably the next highest. The reason for that is I think she has the potential to be a contender in 2 divisions. And she could still contend at 115. She just needs to string 1, maybe 2 wins together and she'll be there. And I think her best performance of her UFC career came against Valerie Letourneau, who, let's not forget, went the distance with Joanna Jedrzejczyk and did well in that fight. She absolutely smashed Valerie Letourneau at 125 pounds. And I know Jojo Calderwood signed to fight Cynthia Calvillo at 115, and she said at the presser that she was a bit pissed off that she seemed to be the last one to know that this 125 pound division was coming, because she signed up to fight at 115. But I think if Jojo moves over to 125, she'll be a serious title threat. So I would put her at the top right now. We've got other British fighters who are at sort of prospect level right now, and they're looking to move up. And I think they've got a little bit of seasoning and a little bit to go. People like Diakiese, he's got a bit of a journey to go through before he gets into title contention, because he's in probably the most stacked weight class in the UFC right now. You've got Arnold Allen, who is in one of the other more talent-stacked weight classes in the UFC at featherweight. He could potentially move his way up there and potentially become a contender in the years to come. But these 2 guys are both young in the sport still, and they're still both young in their UFC career. I think it's going to take them a little bit of time before they're right up there in title contendership. So right now, I would say Jojo Calderwood. What else do we have here? Paul James again. Also, are you guys going to the Bellator event on Friday? If so, might see you guys there. Well, you'll definitely see Chamatkar Sandhu there because he's 6'4" and he's pretty distinctive. So you'll see him knocking around the place. So if you see him, just scream the Brit Pack at him. He'll be very pleased about that. And I'll be sitting at press row on fight night. I'm not there during the week. I'm working from home this week. But I'll be cage side on fight night. So if any of you end up anywhere near the press seats on fight night, by all means give me a shout between the fights, and if I hear you, I will quite happily come over and we can have a quick chinwag between the fights. What else have we got here? Right, why George? This is Ash Sajad. Why George St. Pierre wants to be respected by the UFC, whereas he's not himself respecting the right of 6 to 7 middleweights. Okay, I think I get what you're getting at there. Why does he want respect from the UFC if he seems quite happy to jump the queue in the middleweight division? Yeah, I agree with that. But it looks as if that's not going to happen anyway now, so that might be redundant as of now. I think he may well be being guided back to 170, which I think is definitely the right move for everyone concerned. Graham Hughes, will Edgar get another title shot? And should all the events not now be officiated under one rule set after the mess with the Alvarez fight? I refer you back, Graham, to what I've already said on the show. Yes, they absolutely should. As for Frankie Edgar, he deserves it. He certainly deserves it. And he certainly earns it. Dana White, in an interview this week, was making a distinction between the two, whether you deserve. So you don't get what you deserve, you get what you earn. Well, Frankie Edgar has earned it. It gets a bit tricky if Jose Aldo wins, because then you have the tricky issue of selling a trilogy fight where the champion is already 2-0 in that trilogy. So that gets tricky. So yeah, as I said earlier, if you want to see Frankie Edgar get a title shot, I guess you must be cheering on Max Holloway when he takes on Jose. RG on Twitter has tweeted, read some recent criticism of Joanna Jedrzejczyk, quotes, she doesn't knock enough people out, close quotes. How unspeakably stupid are some MMA, quote, fans. Well, here's the thing, right? And this is a slogan that my dad told me many, many years ago. He said, opinions are like arseholes, son. Everyone's got one. And everyone's entitled to an opinion, even if it's dumb, right? So, yeah. People want to criticise Joanna Jedrzejczyk because she doesn't knock enough people out. Take a look around the rest of the strawweight division, and you show me someone who's knocking people out at 115 pounds. They're just not there. You know, Joanna is the most dominant champion, along with Demetrius Johnson in the UFC. She fights in an exciting style. She fights with real viciousness and tenacity and speed and technique. She's got a great personality away from the fights. And then when she gets into fight mode, she becomes this absolute killer. She ticks almost every box. Okay, she doesn't send women spinning to the ground or, you know, sort of roll their eyes back and knock them out clean. Okay. There's more than one way to skin a cat, is what I would say. There are many ways to win an MMA fight, and knocking people out Sparko is only one of them. And nobody has come close to beating her at this point. So, yeah, I mean, everyone's entitled to their opinion, RG. But I mean, I'm with you. If you can't appreciate just the level of skill, the level of talent on display when Joanna Jedrzejczyk fights, then I don't think you're getting the most out of the sport of MMA. And hopefully over time, maybe you will. What else have we got here? Have we got any more? Just scrolling up. Ant Riley, who should GSP fight? What can the UFC do to, quote, understand the Diaz brothers? This is a great question. Well, it's a great two-part question. First off, who should GSP fight? He should fight Tyron Woodley. That's the fight right now. He should fight Tyron Woodley. Damian Maia needed some time off, so this is the perfect opportunity for GSP to fight. It doesn't interfere with anything. It keeps the division moving. No one gets screwed over. No one gets left on the sidelines. Everyone's a winner. Book the fight. July, ideally, would be great. And what can the UFC do to, quote, understand the Diaz brothers? The Diaz brothers are great. I don't ever want the Diaz brothers to change, but I just want to see them fight. So there needs to be something. There needs to be they need to have a sit down. To be honest with you, it's difficult to know if you're Nate Diaz, what fights are you going to take? Because the Conor McGregor fight is the obvious one. The trilogy fight with Conor McGregor, and that fight will do spectacular pay-per-view numbers. And I think once this whole McGregor-Mayweather thing has run its course, whether the fight happens or whether it gets scrapped, the Diaz-McGregor fight, I think, is the obvious fight to make. And that might be one of the reasons why Diaz hasn't been put in anything else yet. So maybe hold that in sort of the back of your mind. We know they tried to put him in with Tony Ferguson. That's a fight I'd love to see, and I think that's a fight that makes total sense. And have the winner of that. Do that for the interim belt. Do that for, I'm not a huge fan of interim belts. If Conor's not defending the title right now, do an interim belt. And do Diaz versus Tony Ferguson. Pay them good money. Pay them proper money. Do the fight. Do it as a headliner. Do it in California, and just make it just make it the show that it really could and should be. As for Nick Diaz, I don't know what desire there is from Nick Diaz to come back again. I'd love to see him back, but we've not seen much of him, so maybe we've seen the last of him. I don't know. I'd love to see him back. I'd also love to. I think there's so many good fights you could put Diaz in there with. The fight I really want to see is Nick Diaz versus Robbie Lawler, and we're not going to see that for a little while because Robbie Lawler's going to fight Donald Cowboy Cerrone. So, and Cowboy Cerrone versus Nick Diaz wouldn't suck either, would it? So maybe the winner of that should fight Nick Diaz. Who knows? But how to understand them? I don't think it's necessarily a case of understanding them. I think you just need to make them an offer they can't refuse. I mean, they are a rarity in this UFC era, in that these are fighters that aren't just saying yes when the phone rings. These are guys who they'll say yes when the conditions are right for them, and I've got no problem with that. I think I just hope that they can come to a point where the conditions are right, and that we do get to see them fight, because they're two of the most exciting, entertaining, fan favourite fighters in the world, and the sport is a poorer place without the likes of Nate and Nick Diaz getting in there and doing their thing. And just as Nate has really seems to have hit stardom, we talked earlier on about fighters that the UFC could really do with giving a push. Nate Diaz is top of that list. They need to push Nate Diaz as the baddest man out there right now, because if Conor McGregor comes back, he needs a foil. He needs a nemesis, and Diaz is that guy because he's beaten him. That's what I would do. So fingers crossed, stuff can be worked out, and at the very least we get to see Nate back in there again. Daryl Chumley, and this is our last question of the week. Is Holloway beating Aldo the better of the outcomes for Frankie Edgar and the division as a whole? Because Aldo versus Edgar 3 is a very tough sell. Yeah, absolutely. We covered that earlier in the show. It's hard to know what they'll do with Aldo. Maybe they'll do Cub Swanson again. If Aldo wins, maybe Cub Swanson gets the shot, because he's right up there and he's deserving of another crack. And there's a backstory there, because Swanson did fight Aldo before and got knocked out very, very quickly. We're not talking Aldo McGregor quickly, but we're talking quickly. So that'll be one he wants to run back. An awful lot of water has gone under the bridge since that fight. So I think that then becomes a narrative rather than a hindrance to the promotion of the fight, if that makes sense. So I think if Aldo wins, Cub Swanson gets the shot. I think if Max Holloway wins, Frankie Edgar gets the shot. So we'll see what happens. As for who I think will win between Holloway and Aldo, right now I'm picking Max. I think Max is going to work Aldo. I really do. Aldo is one of the most technical fighters in the world, but he needs space. He needs space, and I don't think Holloway will give him space. And I think Holloway has got a chin on him and will be prepared to walk through some of Aldo's strikes in order to close that distance. And if he can do that, then we really will see a serious test of Jose Aldo's skills. And if Aldo then gets through Max Holloway, then he really is legitimately the best guy in that division. So looking forward to that fight. There's so many big fights with that big press conference. We didn't even touch on that. Maybe we'll talk about that on next week's show. We need Sandhu for that one. We definitely need Sandhu for that one. And obviously what we'll do, we will look back on what's coming up this Friday night, Bellator 179. I understand in the UK we're going to get it on Channel 5. I believe it'll be on 1 hour delay. Don't ask me. Sport on a tape delay. It's 2017. No idea. But anyway, enjoy the fights, and I will speak to you. Thanks so much for listening, by the way. We'll wrap up. We'll wrap up all business. The Brit Pack MMA on Twitter. Follow us, please. The BritPackMMA.com. Go to the website, check it out. Lots of cool stuff on there, including all of our past shows. And don't forget, you can follow Sandhu at Sandhu MMA. You can follow me at Simon Head. Follow our coverage on Fight Week at MMAJunkie.com. Follow my live fight night coverage at MMA365.com. And that's it done. Episode 39. Thank you so much for being with me on this week's show. And we will speak to you, both of us, next week.